24th, 24th annual organic gardening class series. We're on Zoom again, and we've had a year of practice. Hopefully we've gotten better, but please be patient with us if we run into to little glitches here and there. The classes are provided by the Idaho Falls Community Garden Association, an entirely volunteer-run local organization that has been growing with Idaho Falls since 1995, which seems an eon ago. We are devoted to teaching organic gardening practices and providing space in our community for people to grow organic gardens. We'd like to thank our wonderful board, Lauren Koss, Sue Holt, Sue Miller, Tony Appelhans, Denise Olson, Elise Hart, and our newest member, Michael Reichenberger, along with our really exceptional and invaluable on the ground and in the dirt garden coordinators at each garden. My name is Christy Appelhans, and I am the president of IFCGA. We've got 3 gardens in various locations around Idaho Falls with plots available to anybody in the community who needs a place to grow. Registration for plots for this coming season will be beginning on April 2nd. And you can watch for further details either on our Facebook page. If you're on Constant Contact list, you'll get a notification there. If you want to be on the Constant Contact list and are not, you can go to to our webpage, ifcga.org, and there's a place right there on the directory page where you can sign up. And we also put it out on the website, so there'll be lots of information once registration is settled. We have had some questions about how to make donations, which people were able to do in our in-person classes, and obviously it's a little harder now. So if you have a Venmo account, you can make a donation directly to IF Community Gardens by searching for us on Venmo, and otherwise you can always send a check to the address that's on the website. As we go into the class, we ask everyone to keep themselves muted and with the video off. We are going to be sure that there are plenty of opportunities to ask questions. You have a chat option on your Zoom program, so use that to ask questions, and at the end of each segment I will break and we will ask whatever questions have come up during that segment. So don't hesitate to ask your questions as soon as you think of them, so that when we get to the end of that segment, you will have that information while it's fresh in your mind, but the other participants will also have the answer to your question, and that will be useful for them. We're just going to get started now with the presentation, Quick and Dirty Guide to Organic Gardening. It is the fundamental presentation that we give to our new community gardeners, so that when they come into the community gardens, they are familiar with the outlines of organic gardening. So we're hoping that it will help you understand both the philosophy and the practice of organic gardening, the why and the how, why we care, and then how we can make it happen, which are often 2 different things. It's going to cover a lot of territory. Don't be overwhelmed. Remember that you can look on our website where there are a lot of the particulars for answering questions that you may have after the presentation is over and you're thinking about this 3 days from now. So don't hesitate to go to the website and check out all the resources that we have there. So now I'm going to try to share the screen, and then we will proceed with the presentation. Okay. I'm going to stop the share for just a moment and turn my video off so that all you have on your screen is the presentation. There we go. Okay, so the intention, as I said, is to help you understand both the philosophy and the practice of organic gardening. And I'm going to start by showing you places of incredible vigor and productivity and beauty that have occurred all without any help from us. These systems have found a balance that, while never perfect, creates space for all the organisms that need these particular environments. It is that web that secures and sustains the system, and that's what we're trying to do as we seek to find balance in our garden systems, whatever size they are. We do that, first of all, by recognizing that we are part of a web of life that encompasses and supports organisms of an enormous variety and utility and significance, no matter what their size or shape. And John Muir said this most eloquently over 100 years ago. When one tugs at a single thing in nature, he finds it attached to the rest of the world. So these communities of organisms, ourselves part of that, play a vital role in a healthy organism, whether it's in your backyard, at a community garden, on a farm, a ranch, or a distant mountaintop, or even in a pot on your balcony. And we will have a class on container gardening later this session. All of these critters have a role to play. I think this guy must have been the inspiration for the creature in Alien. They're so incredible looking. Some are more appealing than others, as you can tell, but they are all part of the whole, and each has a role, mostly to support an ecosystem, only occasionally disrupted, despite what you might have learned. And this role playing goes all the way down to the amazing organisms, micro and macro, that populate healthy soil. So look at these guys. Taking soil as an example, these are a few of the many guys that are in the soil. And at first glance, they look kind of creepy, but once you understand their importance, you can look at them with new eyes and really appreciate them. I think we have perhaps an innate reluctance to embrace these organisms. Look at the center of the top row of this is a nematode. And it has a pretty negative connotation around here because of the potato cyst nematode, and it has devastated entire potato crops. There are others that can cause problems as well, but they represent a minuscule proportion of the more than 20,000 identified nematodes that are out there. And there are some estimates that say there could be up to 1 million species. The rest of them, apart from those few bad guys, serve to facilitate nutrient cycling. They control disease-causing organisms, including eating the potato cyst nematode. There are predatory nematodes that will eat other nematodes. So they play a vital role in keeping the balance within the soil. Bacteria and fungi and even the arthropods like the centipedes and millipedes are also a vital part of the soil food web, and their health has a direct impact on soil health, on plant health, and ultimately on our health. So it's important to keep in mind as you embark on your organic gardening journey that imperfection is part of the picture. not just with your plants, but with the processes that you are using and your understanding of those processes. One of the most helpful things that I've heard in my life as an organic gardener was the statement by Maya Angelou in which she said, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better." And that's really a helpful framework to move forward whenever you're doing anything new that you're learning about continuously. Sometimes you will see things in your garden that will kind of strike terror in your heart. But experience has taught me, and I'm sure many of the other gardeners who have had time in this realm, that it isn't wise to leap to conclusions, and that it's okay if things aren't perfect. So a couple examples of this. In this case, this is an oak tree in our garden. And what you see on there is honeydew from aphids. And the first time I realized that we had aphids in our oak trees, I was just in a panic because I thought they're going to kill these trees. And I didn't know what to do about it, but I knew I should do something. Well, in fact, what I learned is I didn't have to do anything except keep my head off those sticky leaves for a couple weeks in the middle of summer. Because the aphids that were there, were part of the ecosystem, and they came and went without doing any harm at all to the tree. And that was not my first impulse. Just like many, many years ago, I found at the time, I viewed it as a really ugly little creature on some wooden fence posts in my garden. And I immediately smushed them all, thinking, oh, I don't want those guys. And it was a year or two later when I discovered that what I had smushed was the kind of creepy-looking larva of a ladybug. And I had decimated that population just because I didn't like the way they looked. So it's a good idea to recognize that there's so much we don't understand and so much nuance in the natural world. If you make your garden your classroom, always exploring, observing, which is especially important, investigating, questioning, looking to find that balance that will lead you to having a really beautiful and productive place. So before we go on, these are the things we're going to be talking about, and I will reiterate that at the end of each section, we'll have a Q&A, and again at the end of the presentation. So please put those questions out there as soon as you think of them so that we can get you answers in proximity to the knowledge you're trying to gain. So the next slide, we're going to start first with soil, and the next slide you see hope it doesn't blow your eyes out, this is the largest text you're going to see in this entire presentation. Because if there's only one thing that you take away from this presentation today, I hope it will be this. Healthy soil is the foundation of a healthy and productive organic garden. Healthy soil is at the very basis of everything. So this is what I learned, and probably many of you, to picture when I thought of a healthy and well-kept garden. Bare soil between the rows, no weeds or anything else marring that space. But in fact, what we're actually seeing here is garden soil that is going to be negatively impacted by a number of factors. Sun, rain, foot traffic. The soil will suffer, and without continuous amendments, so will the plants, because the soil biology will not be able to do its job under these conditions. Not to mention how much space they're wasting with those big, wide pathways. This is what a lot of us have learned is the optimal, but this is really where you're headed. And these are some of the ways that will help you get there. So 5 principles, and they're pretty straightforward. Build up your soil. Add organic matter. Organic matter is the heart and soul of good soil. When organic matter is abundant, soil microorganisms are optimally situated to do their job for recycling nutrients by extracting from the organic matter and from the soil components around them the nutrients required by your plants. A healthy microbial population is at the center of a healthy and productive crop. Dr. Elaine Ingham, who has spoken and come to Idaho Falls before, has done some incredible research, and a lot of other people as well, describing how plants actually put out a signal that tells the microorganisms, essentially it's asking for the nutrients that the plant needs. And it rewards the organisms by putting out exudates that the organism needs. So it's a very symbiotic, positive relationship. And that's going on in your soil all the time. But it is only going on optimally if you have good biology in your soil, if you have a lot of organisms that are active in there with a lot of variety. So getting organic matter in the soil is really important. Do not disturb. If you have to work the soil, which you will if you are starting a new garden or if you have a lot of weeds that need to be removed, do it as gently as possible and as little as possible, because what you have in the soil are layers of material and layers of microorganisms based on what they need and what they feed on and all that kind of stuff. Every time you till up the soil or dig it up really vigorously, you're totally throwing those guys into the air and letting them come down wherever. Then they have to reestablish their presence in the soil where they need to be. Each time they're disturbed, that's where their energy is going. They're not nutrient cycling anymore. They're trying to reestablish their populations. You want them to be working for you all the time. So disturbing them as little as possible is key to helping them, in conjunction with adding organic matter and doing these other things. That's what lets them be optimally productive within the soil, which is good for your plants. Keep it covered. Those bare soils, which I admit myself, I used to think that was exactly what they should look like. Run the tiller through until you had this light, fluffy soil, all the weeds are gone, etc., etc. In fact, that's pretty bad for the soil. So whenever you can, protect the soil from sun, from the impact of rainfall, which is surprisingly effective in compacting your soil. Anytime you do that, you're also protecting the microbial population, who don't thrive if it's really dry from too much sun, or compacted because it's had hard rain or footsteps on it. All of those things compress the soil and drive out oxygen, which all the microbes need that are beneficial. With the oxygen gone, you get into an anaerobic situation, and then you get harmful organisms that are thriving. So use mulch. Use narrow footpaths and closer spaced rows. Optimize how much cover is on your ground. You can even use some permanent ground covers like a low-growing clover to provide protection and keep those micro-feeding roots in the ground active for as much of the year as possible. Most of the time, you rip out everything in the fall, and then there's nothing in the soil. So mulch it with leaves, plant a winter cover crop, put in a permanent low-growing cover crop that will just stay there year-round. The more the merrier. Go for as much diversity as possible in your garden. The more diversity in your garden, the more diversity in your microbes. That diversity is going to yield a benefit to any plant in the area by assuring that as much as it's possible, there are organisms there available that are capable of delivering whatever it is that your plant needs. So use a lot of different plants. Don't just plant, 5 rows of broccoli. Get some other stuff mixed in there and be sure that you get as many different kinds of plants that you like to have growing, not weeds, as possible, so that your soil biology is as diverse as possible. And lastly, patience really is a virtue in this case. Building soil takes time, but the results are so worth it that it serves you well to be patient and persistent. Each year that you work on your soil, you're going to see improvements that will increase both the health and the productivity of your plants. The best addition is organic matter and tincture of thyme, but if you are more impatient than that and can find a really reliable source of biologically active compost, or compost tea or compost extract, the key there is biologically active, not the junk that is sometimes sold as compost. It's got to have the biology in it in order to do your soil the benefit that you want. That's a good supplemental strategy. So I know that that's a lot to absorb, and I am sure that your minds are kind of going, oh, this is way too much. But we've got some really excellent links on the website. It's IFCGA.org. You see it down at the bottom. The ones that I think are the most concise are the ones at the top of the page from Dr. Buzz Clute. He's an NRDC and University of North or South Carolina. Anyway, he's got a lot of really quick and dirty videos that capture the essence of how to help build healthy soil. But all of these are good references. And as I said, you can find them all on our website. Those are the kinds of things that will help you move your garden from this place to this place, which is where you'd like to be. Okay, so we're going to take a little break here before we go on to the next section to see if there are any questions. Sue and Tony, I don't have a visual of the chat box, so you'll have to tell me if we have any questions. Okay. Tony said there are no questions, so let's go on to the next section. We're going to talk about cultural practices. So here's another example of the same pattern in a conventional garden that we talked about before. Very well kept, very weed-free, not a mess of a garden, and yet a lot of harm is being done to the soil in the service of that kind of order. Here's where you'd like to be. You'll notice in this picture that there is no place where there is any bare ground showing. That's optimal. So we'll talk about some strategies to get there. One of the things that I'm sure most of you have heard about is the need to rotate your crops. Now, Dr. Ingham contends that if you have your soil in truly optimal condition, you don't need to rotate your crops because the soil biology is going to handle any problems that come up. I tested that theory a few years ago by planting brassicas, the broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, in the same row for 3 years running. And each year I kind of held my breath and waited for something terrible to happen. On the 4th year, I just couldn't do it one more year, but on those 3 years, they did beautifully the whole time. So I have not tried it on the more challenging things like tomatoes or potatoes, especially in this area. But in general, it's a good idea to rotate your crops. Make a map of your garden in a notebook that you won't lose. Experience speaking there. And then the next year when you go to plant your garden, don't put things of the same family in the same spots. So don't plant your potatoes where your tomatoes were or vice versa. That will help keep the biology of that soil in a healthy state where one harmful organism hasn't had a chance to just keep replicating because you're not giving it the same opportunity to feed every year. As I said, once you get your soil really in a good spot, it's less of a concern. But I still do it, and I think most of the good gardeners I know are careful about rotating. Choose your varieties thoughtfully. So this is both it goes both ways. You want to pick things that are well suited to your climate, to the amount of sun, to the amount of water, etc. On the other hand, don't let that deter you from doing a little experimenting if you want to. Nobody thought you could grow artichokes in Idaho, and one of our cohorts in the garden world here started doing that probably 30 years ago, and now there are a lot of people who are growing artichokes in Idaho. So choose your varieties thoughtfully, but don't let that limit you too much. It's kind of fun to experiment. Water wisely, and that's a pretty general statement. Basically, what it means is give your plants adequate and regular water. Deliver it as best you can, optimally through something like drip tape, so that the plants are not getting overhead watered. If you can't do that, then you can't. But controlling how you apply the water and when you apply it is one of the things that will help your garden be healthy. You don't want to stress your plants by putting them through really extreme water presence and absence. So you soak the heck out of them to begin with, and then you don't water them for a week and a half. That's going to stress plants. Stressed plants are more likely to have problems. Avoid monocultures. So if you're going to grow 30 brassica plants, try to intersperse them around your garden rather than putting them all together. Even if you're just going to grow 10 or 5, spread them out. That will make it more difficult for any pests that do come around to find your plants. Don't crowd stuff. This is really more important than you would guess. Use proper spacing, which sometimes that's going to depend on your particular space and how fertile your soil is and how vigorous your plants are. But the biggest tendency, I would say, is to put them too closely together. Space them properly, give them enough room so their roots can get out there and signal to those microbes what they need and not have to be competing with a lot of other plants. For some plants like carrots and beets and that kind of thing, they can grow quite closely together, but they still need to be thinned. If you have 15 carrots in 6 inches in your garden bed, you're not going to get a nice carrot, and you're also going to increase the probability that they have problems. That's true with all the plants. Encourage natural predators and other beneficials. So plantings of beneficials, of seed, there are seed collections that are specifically designed to have a lot of flowers that the natural predators and other beneficial insects will be drawn to. So investigate those or create your own mixes and get a wide variety of flowers out there in your garden so that it will attract the predators that will help control any insect populations that might decide to visit you. Use mulch. Mulch is a wonderful way to suppress weeds, to hold soil moisture, and it even, because you're using organic materials like leaves and grasses that aren't sprayed, it will break down and will build your soil at the same time it's providing those other benefits. You can also use cover crops, which are, there's a wide variety of them that can be planted in the spring. They can be planted in the summer when you've taken your harvest out. They can be planted in the fall to winter over and come up in the early spring. There's a lot of opportunity there. You're accomplishing a number of things there. Again, you're protecting the soil. If you've taken plants out from your harvest, you don't want to leave bare soil there. At the very least, mulch it with leaves, but even better if you can get a cover crop mix that will come up and grow in that area and feed those microbes and keep them active in the soil as much as possible. You'll have a much healthier population when you're ready to put your crop in there. So using cover crops is another cultural practice that really can benefit the soil and therefore your crops and your harvest. Plant resistant varieties. A lot of varieties on their packets will tell you if you have a particular problem in your area, for instance, verticillium wilt, which is a problem that causes the vascular system of the plant to close down. It's a fungus, I believe. But there are varieties that are specifically resistant to verticillium wilt that have been bred over the years. So if you have a problem in your soil or in your garden, look for plant varieties that may have a bred-in resistance to that problem. That can sometimes be an effective way to stop a persistent problem. You can also use the strategy of, that's where, once again, the strategy of rotating your crops is helpful. I had a really bad problem with potato scab many years ago, and I left that soil where I had gotten the potatoes that had scab. I did not plant potatoes there for 5 years. When I did, again, they were fine. So you can address those problems in multiple ways, but one of the ways is to find varieties that are resistant to whatever the problem is you're looking at. And again, build your soil. Keep working on your soil all the time. Everything you do to increase the health of your soil is going to increase the health of your plants. Here's a handy visual that addresses all the things we've talked about, plus a few other ones. Know your plant's needs and choose locations that meet them. So don't pick a plant that needs full sun and put it in a shady place and not expect that it's going to have some problems. Try to pay attention to those kinds of things. Use companion planting, which is a way to mix your plantings up. And there is some research that shows specific plants like to grow near other plants, and specific plants that don't like to grow near other plants. So do a little research on that and try to find companions that will help one another in the season as they are growing to fruition. If you find that you have diseased plants in your garden, be sure to remove them as soon as you see them and destroy them. Don't just put them on the edge of the garden, because a lot of the times it's some kind of fungus or virus that can be moved around if it's left in the vicinity of the garden. So put them in the trash. Another interesting one that I've tried a couple of times fairly successfully is to time your planting to avoid insect hatches. So for instance, with spinach, if you plant spinach in the spring, you very often end up with a pretty serious infestation of leaf miners, which tunnel little tunnels through the spinach. If you plant your spinach in the fall, let it get started just barely coming up in the fall, and then overwinter it, it will come up really early in the spring, and you will have a very nice crop of spinach before the leaf miners ever come into the picture. So that's a useful tip for trying to avoid some particular insect issues. I think we've covered the rest of these things on here. Build your soil year-round. Always be thinking about how you can make your soil healthier. Using these practices will help you move from this place to this place. And remember to be patient. It takes time. Okay, I think we are at another turning point. Do we have any questions, Tony or Sue? No. Okay. Are you guys sure you don't have any questions? This is a lot of information, and I definitely like to answer questions as they come up. You can use the chat feature on your Zoom presentation to ask the questions, and they will come to Tony or Sue or me, and we'll definitely try to get them answered. Okay. We're moving on to insect ID and control. So you can spray noxious chemicals on your food and your flowers and everything else, or you can begin to work with your garden system to bring it into balance. And here are some ways that you can do that. And there is more information about all of this on the website. So we have a system called IC, and it stands for Identify, Classify, and then decide whether you should keep or kill. And it's really important when you're looking at insect problems in your garden that you do this. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's very easy to appropriate blame because of the way something looks or where it is or what you think it's done, when in fact it may be something beneficial, or at the very least it isn't something harmful. So when you find an insect in your garden that you're suspicious of, find out what it is, classify it as either beneficial, neutral, or harmful, and then make the decision whether to keep or kill it, rather than just reflexively killing whatever insects you see. Chances are literally 99-to-1 that insect is not causing a problem in your garden. 99% of the insects in the world have no negative or beneficial properties. So keep that in mind when you're doing ID. Encourage natural predators and beneficials. We mentioned this earlier. Find bug blends. There are blends called good bug blends, which I mentioned earlier, that are pre-made to have a lot of the flowers and plants that attract beneficials to your gardens. You can also do a little research and create your own specific for your region or even your garden. So take the time to do some of that planning this time of year, and get the seeds that you're going to need, or make a list of the plants you're going to need, and get those planted out in your garden. It will encourage the natural predators and beneficials. It'll always really add something lovely to your garden. So that's a really helpful strategy. Observe your garden. Spend time in your garden just walking around and looking at things. It's a much easier problem to solve when it's detected at the very beginning than when it's gotten to a point where it looks catastrophic. And if you spend some time in your garden just wandering around, looking at what's growing, looking at how it's growing, trying to see if there are any issues that you might need to investigate, chances are good that you will catch and be able to control a problem that, had you waited another few days or a week, might have been out of control. And that pushes you into methods that you really don't want to have to use in your garden, even if they are organic. If you do have a problem that gets out of control, then the way you want to approach it is to use the least intensive control possible. And we've got a chart in a minute, and I'll show you what that means. Finally, build your soil. Healthy soil means healthy plants, and healthy plants are much less likely to be stressed and invite problems. They're much more likely to be able to resist the problems that do come, so that if there is a problem pest that comes in, a healthy plant will have a much stronger reaction to that than one that is struggling or stressed. So once again, keep building your soil at the forefront of your mind whenever you're doing anything in your garden. This is a list that's available on the website. It's a really helpful list because it shows you from least intensive on the left to most intensive on the right, different ways that you can approach your garden to either prevent or deal with problems in the least intensive way possible. So prevention is the optimal place to be. You want to be constantly observing your garden. As we've mentioned before a couple times, get some beneficial insect habitat in there. Remove your diseased plants if you get something that looks bad or has a disease. Companion plant with repellent or trap plants. There are some plants, it's kind of a fun idea, that will attract certain insects preferentially and keep them away from plants that you care more about. So that's another way to approach it. Adequate and consistent water availability. Again, you don't want the up and down of really wet and then really dry. All these things that we talked about in cultural practices are here in the least intensive strategies for optimizing a healthy garden. And again, you'll notice that soil health is there. And this is an older chart. It says reduce tilling. Your goal ought to be no tilling. You can get to a place where you don't have to ever till your soil. So keep that as a long-term goal. Mechanical strategies are the next level of intensity. So You can hand pick insects. If you have little children, they love to pick potato bugs. Row covers can be used to protect the plants. And if you do a little research and learn what the life cycle of a particular pest is, you can put the row covers on at a time when it will protect them from the infestation. The infestation runs its life cycle, and then sometimes you can actually take the row covers off. Row covers allow enough light penetration, if you select them properly, should be at least 85%, that you don't ever need to take them off if you don't want to. The plants are getting enough light, they'll continue to grow, and they'll be protected from any kind of fly that lays an egg, either at the base of the plant or on the leaf. It works for cabbage butterflies who lay their eggs on the brassica family. It can be very effective. Water sprays, some people use that. I haven't found it particularly effective, but again, if you get an infestation early, for instance of aphids, and they're on your brassicas, you can take a hard spray of water and wash them off, and that will certainly diminish them. Whether it will actually eliminate them, I don't believe so. Sticky traps and confusion lures, those are both things that are mechanical strategies for preventing infestations that are severe enough to create a problem. And again, this goes back to the whole notion of your garden is not going to be perfect. Don't expect that, and it won't be traumatic when you see that your brassica leaves have a few little holes in them, or the leaves of your lettuce or some other plant have been nibbled on. What you're looking for is trying to prevent whatever insect is there from becoming a problem. But the fact that they're there in and of itself usually doesn't mean that there is a problem. It's only when they become out of balance. Beneficial and biological things. My single favorite treatment on my brassica plants to control cabbage butterflies is BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a bacteria that gets in the gut of the cabbage larva and the cabbage butterfly larva and kills it. It has no effect on people or other insects. It's very particular to this larva. So it's really great. There are biological fungicides, milky spore disease, beneficial nematodes. I have used those to control a nematode, not a beneficial nematode that was in our grass. I can't remember the name of it, but that was reasonably successful. So use these strategies before you get to mineral, botanical, insecticides, and fungicides. These are the most intensive strategies, and they will harm other insects in your garden, many of whom are going to be beneficials, as I noted earlier. So if you can use one of these previous strategies and not ever end up in this most intensive box, you've done a really good job. Sometimes you may find that you need to use some of these. If you do, remember that these products, just because they're organic, doesn't mean that they're not harmful to people, like diatomaceous earth. You really don't want to breathe that, to other animals, or to beneficial insects. So use them only when you really have to, and be sure you pay attention to the directions, because they may give you some cautions that you need to be aware of. So again, you can be here or you can be here. And the strategies that we've talked to are ways to help you end up in this place rather than spraying poisons on your garden. Somebody's trying to update. Okay. Time for a Q&A. Okay. So now we're going to look at weed control. This is probably the most hated part of gardening, is trying to control the weeds. Here we are again, spraying poisons on things. But there are other ways to do it. And as you can see from all the mulch in both these pictures, that's a really important one. So, weed control in an organic garden is about keeping ahead of them. These capital letters are there because this is so important. 2 things that you need to know about weed seeds. Every weed makes a gazillion seeds because that's how they propagate themselves. And even those weeds that are perennials make a gazillion seeds. So you're not off the hook just because it's a perennial. Seeds in the soil, weed seeds in the soil, can last conservatively, some of them, this is not all seeds, as long as 35 years. So every time those seeds drop down, you're taking the chance that that seed is going to be in that soil, and maybe it gets buried and it can't germinate, but it just waits around until it gets back up close enough to the surface and gets a little moisture, and there you go, you've got that weed back. It's another reason that you don't want to be tilling and moving your soil around all the time, because if those seeds are in there and they stay down underneath, they can't germinate. But when you are digging your soil or tilling it and mixing it all up, you're going to bring some of those seeds up, and they're going to have the opportunity at least to germinate. So don't let weeds go to seed. If you see any weeds, the earlier you get them out, the better, because that minimizes the chance that they're going to be able to make seeds. Be persistent. It's kind of fun in the spring to go after the weeds and get the ground looking really clean. It can be a little disheartening by July when a whole bunch of them have come back again. So that's the time when you really need to remember that persistence is going to pay off. Get them out of the ground as soon as you can and keep getting them out of the ground, and over time you will diminish the population of weeds in your garden by an order of magnitude. I would say in our, we probably have 4,000 square feet of garden, maybe more. We spend, I would say, an average of 15 minutes a week cleaning the weeds out of it. So you can get there, but you do have to be persistent and timely in your removal of weeds so that they don't get a chance to be vigorous, and they definitely don't get to make seeds. Use mulch. Mulch, mulch, mulch. Anywhere you can. And we're going to talk about sheet mulching in a minute, because that's a very effective way of beginning to diminish the burden of weeds in a garden. Cover cropping is also a good way to reduce the effective growth of weeds. It doesn't kill the weeds necessarily, but I have seen a good crop of ryegrass and peas push back bindweed and quackgrass to the point where you didn't know it was there. It was a really dense cover crop that we planted over at Eastside Garden one year. And when it was growing, the bindweed and the quackgrass could not thrive. And that diminishes the health of those weeds until eventually they are going to give up. So cover crops are a way to both build soil and to reduce the burden of weeds in a given area. If you have any bare ground, which you may for various reasons, and you need to remove weeds from it, do it really shallowly. Anytime you cultivate in your garden for weed control, do it as shallowly as you can. When you're removing a perennial weed, that's not going to be shallow. You're going to have to get in there with a garden fork and loosen those roots and get them out. But do that in as concentrated way as you can, and in all other cases, cultivate as shallowly as you can, so you're not bringing those weed seeds up from down below and getting them up close to the surface where they can germinate. And if you're doing cultivating, try to avoid doing it right before you're going to water, because then you've got some seeds up there on the surface, and then you water them so that they can grow for you, and you don't really want that when it's weeds. And back to where we were before, keep building your soil. There's a whole bunch of research, and I won't go into it now, but there is a lot of research that shows which plants like to grow in what kind of soil. And in the early stages of healthy soil, you have a lot of bacteria in your soil and not so much of the other organisms. And there's a whole raft of weeds and whole weed families that love bacterially dominated soil. Once you start to get a better balance in your soil, those weeds don't thrive. I know it seems kind of impossible, but it's true. They don't like the composition of the soil as well, so they are not vigorous, or they're not there at all. So keep working on your soil for all of these reasons that we've talked about so far. So here's the handout about sheet mulching. This is also on the website, IFCGA.org, probably on the class page down below. But sheet mulching is a really effective way to reduce the weeding challenges. And the thing that I would point out that isn't on this is that you cannot sheet mulch on top of a pathway that's completely infested with quackgrass and expect it to do very much good, or bindweed, or any of those things. You do have to do some preliminary weeding to get the bulk of the especially perennial weeds out of the soil before you do this. But once that's done, if you will put down a bunch of layers of butcher paper or newspaper or cardboard, being sure to overlap the edges, water it so that it stays in place while you get your compost or straw or grass clippings or whatever, then put that on top of your paper layer. And I no longer recommend that you avoid wood mulches. I think they're fine as long as they're not treated anyway. They will take longer to break down, but they will also bring a lot of fungal life into the soil, and that's a good thing. So as long as you're putting them in your rows, for instance, and not necessarily right around your plants, I think they're fine to use. Be sure that you've really captured the edges of whatever your paper layer is, because you know how the wind is here in Idaho, and you really don't want to send all this stuff to Wyoming. What this does is it suppresses weeds, it holds moisture in the soil, and even if that's just happening in your pathway, because you've sheet mulched your pathway, your plant roots reach out in all directions, and they go where they need to go to find what they need. And so if you have a row of tomatoes and you've sheet mulched, you can sheet mulch in between tomatoes actually, because they're far enough apart, but say you haven't, and you've sheet mulched in the pathways on either side of them, those roots are going to go out there and they're going to look for moisture there. They're going to look for the biology they need out there. So even though you may be only sheet mulching in your rows, your pathways, I mean, that's going to do a lot of good and be a big benefit for the plants that are there. When you're doing big plants that are widely spaced, like brassicas or tomatoes, you can sheet mulch right in between those. We do that with the kids in the Sprouts program, and they usually don't put the paper down, but they do a lot of mulching with leaves and grass, and it works great. So sheet mulch, for all its benefits, as I said, it's going to reduce your weeding, it's going to conserve soil moisture, and as those mulch materials break down, it's going to build your soil. So it's a win-win. So you can be here, oops, or you can be there. So I'm going to stop for a minute here just to show you. This is so much information, and particularly if you are a new gardener, you're wondering how the heck you're ever going to remember what to do, much less when to do it. So we've got your back on the website. On this page, it's our directory page, you'll find the Idaho month-by-month gardening guide. And that will walk you through, starting in January, the things you need to be thinking about, planning for, doing throughout the entire gardening year. And the good news is, since it's only January, you can't even be far behind at this point. By May, it might be a different story, but it's a good time to have a look at that and just look ahead at the next few months, get an idea of what kinds of things you can be thinking about, what kind of plans you can be making, all of those kinds of things. This is a really good resource, and it's particular to southeastern Idaho. It might not work if you were in Seattle or Memphis, but it's a really good guide for southeastern Idaho, and I recommend that you have a look at it. Okay, I think we will take a break here. Any questions? No. Okay. You guys must just already know everything. All right, now we're going to go on to seed matters. And seed matters in lots of different ways. From your sourcing of seeds and plants, keep that in mind too. Know where your seeds come from. Good seeds matter. Vigor, flavor, or fragrance in the case of flowers, yield, all these are connected to good breeding and how much care those seeds have been given while they've been stored. And so it matters where they've come from. If you're paying 25 cents for a packet of seeds, you're getting 25 cents worth of seeds most likely. It's the same when you're sourcing your plants. Good plants matter, their sources matter, and a lot of times you get what you pay for. So, that can be good or bad. Sometimes you'll come across a real buy and it'll turn out great, but a lot of times you are getting what you pay for. And if you want good seeds, you need to go to a good source to get them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Buy organic seeds whenever you can. And you might wonder why that matters. Not perhaps for the reason you think, but because organic seeds have been grown and shown that they can thrive in a low input system. And what that means is a system that's not constantly being supplemented with chemical fertilizers. So if you buy seeds that have been grown organically, that's the first step in knowing that they're going to be vigorous enough to thrive in your low input organic garden. The one caveat here is good sourcing is still important. You can buy crummy organic seeds just like everything else. There's a lot of push right now for organic everything, and I'm sure it's been beneficial in some ways, but one of the ways that it has compromised seeds is that A lot of growers are working really hard to grow organic seeds, but they are not taking care with the way they grow them, the way they select them, and so you get a really mixed bag of vigor, productivity, flavor, etc., because they're not taking the care that you or I would take if we were selecting for ourselves. So be sure that whatever source you're buying your organic seeds from is a reputable source that is going to buy seeds from somebody who is taking care as they grow them and selecting properly and doing all that stuff. If you really want to be sure your seeds are perfect for you, the optimal strategy for ensuring that you have seeds adapted to your particular conditions is to save them yourself. And we're going to have a seed saving class, we hope, in sometime in March. Maybe in person, it may be Zoom. We'll see what COVID is doing by then. But we also have really great seed saving sources on the website. There's a video from last year with Casey O'Leary from Snake River Seeds over in Boise, which is a big seed co-op. And Casey did a presentation for us last year that we archived, and it's there for you to look at. Start with the easy things like lettuce and beans and peas, those kinds of things, and then keep learning and growing and figuring out how to do more and more complicated things, because you can really develop seeds that are adapted to your specific situation in your specific garden. When I first started saving seeds back in the 90s, I was trying to get a tomato that would ripen without me having to cover it with a ton of stuff for 2 or 3 weeks at the end of the season. That was back when we could fairly reliably get a frost before the end of August. I now have Brandywine, yellow and red Brandywines, and a host of other tomatoes that begin ripening in early August. I don't any longer need the protection as much as I did because, as we all know, climate change has made us warmer. But I still have these tomatoes that, by selectively choosing which plants to save seeds from over these many years, I've got Brandywine tomatoes that ripen in the window that I have in Idaho in my garden. So saving seeds is a fun and effective way of ensuring that you get seeds that work in your garden. The other thing about seeds, if you've ever stepped out at night, especially in the summer on a clear night, and you've come out of a brightly lit house into the dark, at first you'll see a few stars, and then as your eyes acclimate, you begin to see more and more, and if you're in the right spot, you might even be lucky and see the Milky Way or something like that. Appreciating seeds is really similar to that, because when you first start gardening, you know the familiar ones, you know, the early girls or the Kentucky Wonder green beans, that kind of stuff. But as you keep exploring the seed universe, you'll become aware of the spectacular diversity and variety of seeds that are available out there, with many, many, many sources of high quality, open pollinated and organic seeds. So get out there and explore. And one of the places that you can do that is, again, on the website. If you go to our seed sources page, this is the direct address, but you can also go to the directory and there's a link. We have a list of places that particularly our board members have gotten seeds from and been happy with those seeds. There are some bolded ones that are our favorites, but there are a whole host of them that provide different kinds of seeds. There's one that's almost exclusively tomatoes, and others that are just potatoes. And really old seeds like you can get from Native Seed Search, an enormous variety of open pollinated seeds from one of the oldest seed saving organizations in the United States. It might be the oldest, Seed Savers Exchange. Those are all listed on there. So go there and explore this universe of seeds and see what kind of wonders you can bring into your garden. Q&A. Any? Okay. I see 3 things in the chat. Does that not have to do with questions? I don't know how to get to it, but okay. So we're winding up here, and there are a couple of things that I'd like you to remember as we wind up. Remember that your garden is your classroom, and there are opportunities galore to continue learning. Remember to embrace imperfection, knowing that it is in the service of a healthy garden ecosystem. And finally, keep these words at hand because they will comfort and encourage you as you begin or continue your journey to grow a beautiful and productive garden. Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better. And we are finished for the moment. We can entertain questions here. I'm going to stop screen sharing and come back into your view and hope that if you have any questions now, we can address them. You can go ahead and unmute yourselves, folks, if you want to ask a question directly, or you can send a chat message as well. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to unmute yourself and ask a question.
I have a question on mulching, Christy.
Yes.
Excuse me. My go-to is always grass clippings because they're never ending. Is that adequate? Do I need to add other things to that? Is that, is there I guess if there like a mulching recipe that you recommend or?
There isn't. That's a good question, though, because I can see why you and other people might be wondering about that. Any organic matter, and by that I mean matter that comes from plants somehow, is suitable for mulching. The only caveat with grass is to be sure that it hasn't been sprayed with an herbicide because those can be very long lasting and have a bad impact on the plants in the vicinity. But grass is an excellent choice. If you wanted to mix grass is very high in nitrogen, so if you want to mix grass with some straw or leaves that have been chopped up or not, that would give you a little more balance because you'd have nitrogen and then you'd have the cellulose that comes in the brown stuff, which is going to encourage a slightly different population. But really, mulching is so valuable that I would use whatever you had at hand and then mix it up if you can, but you don't have to. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions, folks? Oh, somebody has a comment about mulching. Go ahead and put your audio on and make your comment, whoever that is.
Hi, Christy. It's Denise. Just a comment about mulching. Last probably 4 years, I've been layering newspaper, like 3 layers, and then I use grass clippings from my lawn because I have plenty every year, and I don't have a herbicide application on my lawn. Um, and that is such a wonderful way of, I just want to confirm what you said about using layering. And it's just a wonderful way. And when you do get like quack grass, it'll grow underneath, but it, maybe start popping out through the edges or something, but it's so weak and it comes out so easy. And it's just really awesome way to keep the weeds at bay and makes it a lot easier for weeding. So I use about 3 layers, and then I layer grass clippings on top of that. And another thing too, with doing that, it helps keep the dirt, soil from getting on your produce. They really like, I pick beans and other produce, and they're just absolutely clean when I pick them out. So yeah, it's an excellent way of weed management and reducing how much weeding you have to do.
That's a good point, especially about the clean produce, and a testimonial to the value of sheet mulching. It really does make a big difference. Thanks, Denise.
You're welcome.
Anybody else with a question? I see a question here that is asking about the first part of the presentation, which someone missed. And we will have this, we'll have a link to the recorded version of this up on the website in the next few days, so that if you want to watch any portion of it, or you want to look at one of those slides again for some reason, you'll be able to do that via the same place on the website that you found your Zoom link. So yes, the answer is yes, there will be this recorded version will be available. Someone has asked about the cover crops that we use to push out bindweed and quackgrass. The year we did that at Eastside, it was an annual rye and one of the peas, and I can't remember off the top of my head, it probably was an Austrian winter pea, which we would have planted in the early spring along with the annual ryegrass. That was a very effective suppressor of bindweed and quackgrass. It didn't kill it by any means, but it definitely suppressed it. All right. Anybody else? You're all enabled to put your speakers on and ask a question outright, or you can still send it through the chat. Okay, here's one. You've mentioned mulch several times. Oops, I can't see the rest of this message. Oh, what is your recommendation on what type of mulch to use? My go-to is grass clippings. There's a never-ending supply. Okay, we answered this one. What pests are most common in this part of Idaho? That's a good question. I would say we also have on the website, we have a handout that actually addresses this. I would say the most common ones here are cabbage loopers or cabbage butterflies, both of which lay an egg on brassica family plants, cabbage and broccoli and all that. And a little larva comes and eats the leaves up. Colorado potato beetle is not uncommon. Aphids, a variety of aphids on a variety of different things, depending on the conditions in your garden and the weather and that kind of stuff. Those are the ones that come to mind for me. If anybody else has some they want to throw out there, please feel free. Okay, I'm checking to see if we have any other questions. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for being here. Again, don't hesitate to use the IFCGA.org website, where you will find more details and practical suggestions and solutions on a variety of the things we've talked about today. There are also those really excellent soil health videos. I highly recommend those. We have classes from previous years. Some of our last year's classes are still available in video form, but prior to that, we have notes and PowerPoint presentations from from classes over several years that are available on the website. So help yourself to any of that information. If you're interested in getting on the constant contact list, again, you can go to the directory page at ifcga.org, and there is a link at the bottom of that page that lets you sign up for the newsletter. Where we post on Facebook, so you can look for Idaho Falls Community Garden Association on Facebook. And again, you can always use our website at ifcga.org. And thanks to everybody.
Oh, Christy?
Yes?
Hey, just checking in on your awesome program. To be extended discussion of healthy soil is next Saturday.
Oh, yeah,
So
thanks,
there's
Sue.
more on how to build healthy soil.
Yep. It's a reprise of last year's presentation from Jackie used to be with NRCS. Really great presentation. We don't have Jackie available with us, but we will have someone there to answer questions. And it's a presentation worth seeing again, even if you've seen it once. There's lots to learn from it. So thanks for that reminder, Sue. And with that, we will say goodbye. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next week for Healthy Soils again. Bye-bye.